Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to this special 5-part podcast series, which I do in conjunction with David Greenberg, Special Advisor at LRN. We take a look at the white paper published by LRN entitled, "What's the Tone at the Very Top? The Role of the Board of Directors in Overseeing Ethics and Compliance." It's clear with each new headline there's a crisis in corporate leadership. You name the scandal. Me Too, retaliation against those who speak out, unrealistic financial targets, and pressure to meet them, toxic workplace cultures. But what about each one of these questions raises the larger question of where was the board? So what's the tone at the board, and what are corporate boards doing? In this special 5-part series, we take a look at why tone at the top is so important, understanding and game planning for your board of directors, why CCOs do not have enough time and enough depth with the board, what are the metrics that a board should be looking at, and how should boards hold senior management accountable, and finally, what's the road ahead? It's a fascinating exploration of a very timely topic. I know you'll enjoy this special 5-part podcast series. This special 5-part podcast series on the role of the board of directors in a best practices compliance program is a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network. Episode 4, Board Metrics and Managing Senior Management by the Board. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with David Greenberg, Special Advisor at LRN, and our 5-part exploration of what's the tone at the very top. Today in Episode 4, we take a look at metrics and senior management. So, David, I guess from my perspective, I feel like both CCOs and boards feel like metrics around compliance and ethics is the panacea, a be-end, and all-end. Is that an incorrect assumption, or are there some metrics that are going to be more useful than others, or how do we even begin to consider this question?
Listen, I think metrics can be incredibly important, and I think that the traditional metrics in this field leave us wanting more and something different. The conventional reporting on activities that we've developed as a default really isn't very compelling and helpful. Now, the right kind of metrics take more time to develop, to understand, and to track. They're tough. And the right metrics are scary for chief ethics and compliance officers, and I think for managements and boards, because they involve results that can be difficult to produce. And take a lot of time, effort, resources, et cetera. So how many chief compliance officers, for example, are confident that they can develop a plan to first drive actual and perceived misconduct in their company down tangibly and measurably? That they can develop a plan to increase speaking out when employees see something that looks wrong and demonstrate that tangibly. Same point about reducing the level of fear and the actual amount of retaliation. And I'd say finally, at kind of the biggest picture, increase employee confidence tangibly that all of this stuff is as meaningful as it sounds in corporate codes of conduct and values and aspirations. Those things are not easy to do. I'm not saying those are, the be-all and end-all of metrics, but questions like that are, big picture, meaningful, deal with real outcomes are where we need to go. But we talked in an earlier episode about the fact that in their heart of hearts and in their stomachs, some board members and managements and maybe even chief ethics and compliance officers are really worried that it's difficult to impossible actually to impact behavior. And so if we're going to set ourselves up with metrics that involve tangible impact on behavior, we got to really tighten our seatbelts and kind of, man up and woman up, because this stuff isn't easy. It's a lot easier to report on what you're doing than to pick some strategic outcomes and commit to producing results.
I have to say, David, that really sounds like a very dramatic challenge for CCOs, and something that perhaps CCOs really need to think about more and work towards, and we have more discussions exactly on that point. How can there be a framework for the development of these key metrics, and then tailor it to each organization on a bespoke basis based upon their own risks, risk tolerance, and risk management tools?
I think that's right. And I think there's some reason to be optimistic, because I would say that if we were having a discussion with an audience of experienced chief ethics and compliance officers, I think a lot of them would agree. This is the challenge and this is the future. And I think they're already working on it. What I've seen from a board level in my own experience, and what I've seen from our study, is that we haven't quite crossed the Rubicon in terms of making that full case to boards, and having boards in turn adopt metrics like that and create the expectations of management that those are the metrics we're going to meet and measure. But I think we're partway there in terms of where the whole field is moving.
David, I'd like to turn now to something that surprised me a little bit. I would say it's almost a tactical issue or a tactical response, but the report noted that many boards do not hold executive sessions with their CCOs, and there was some frustration in the CCO reporting community on this. So I'd like to start with that, and then really get your thoughts on if that is something as a board member you would like to see more of, or kind of looking back in your prior life as a CCO, would you have found that of value if that had been available to you?
Well, overall, this is a no-brainer, absolute no-brainer. Okay, I think it is scandalous that this doesn't happen in every company. You're not going to build a connection and relationship with chief compliance officers without this. It sends a powerful signal to management. It puts ethics and compliance on the map and gives it more equal weight to functions like internal audit, law, and finance, who do have executive sessions. It makes it more likely that chief compliance officers will feel empowered to do what they got to do when the rubber of senior misconduct hits the road. It's the right thing to do from a legal and policy point of view. The federal sentencing guidelines and the DOJ sentencing criteria both reference it, that it's the right practice. And it's easy to do. Usually it takes no time because there's nothing to report. But it is an incredibly important insurance policy for when there is something to report, it gets done and it'll be worth the time. So I had that. I had a separate session with the audit committee at every audit committee meeting. It helped do all of the things I said. And as a chairman of a governance committee and a member of an audit committee, I've insisted on it, and it happens, and it helps. It's not the be all and end all, but a lot of times it's a reflection of the fact that there's not a significant relationship and connection between boards and ethics and compliance. I might add, too, that as we're talking about this, boards need to understand that there also needs to be a relationship outside of the board or committee meetings with the chief ethics and compliance officers. Those relationships exist with senior management, and they exist with the other important functions. And that's something that will really help, because outside of board meetings, there's more time and ability to focus. It's not impossible to get 2 hours of an audit chair or governance chair's time to really go into depth, once a year or more. And that sets up everything else.
So, David, I'd like to end with a couple of your thoughts around the issue of how should a board either direct, influence, or communicate to senior management that it expects senior management to be involved in the overall compliance effort. Should they expect reports from senior management? Should they expect involvement in terms of sending out communications to employees? What would you suggest that a board do on that score?
It's funny. When I work with boards, sometimes they say, ask that exact question, like, how do we communicate to senior management that this is important? And I tell them it's always a curious question to me. Boards create all sorts of expectations and accountabilities for senior management. They also create compensation plans for senior management. And you can tell what's important by looking at what the chief executive officer's objectives are for the year. You can tell what's important by looking at how the compensation plan for senior management works. Overall, you've got to drive ethics, compliance, culture, integrity, doing the right thing into the heart of the business. And a good place to start is, what are the expectations we as a board are creating for senior management? If you read objectives and you read comp plans, and integrity and ethics and compliance and doing the right thing are nowhere to be seen, you're starting way behind the curve. And so I think that's where you start. You start with, here are expectations of senior management, and senior management has a tool and resources, called, one of which is the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer and his or her team, to help meet those objectives. But if you don't put ethics and compliance squarely into the business and squarely onto the shoulders of the CEO and his or her team, you're handicapping the whole effort. So that's where I would start. And I don't think that's unreasonable to ask senior management, come to us with a set of objectives that reflect how you're going to positively influence the culture of integrity and the right kinds of behaviors at your company. And that will probably lead to senior management turning to the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, maybe the Chief Human Resources Officer in tandem, and saying, you men and women go struggle with this and come back to us with a plan. And then you're starting to talk about a strategic game plan that's the right kind of strategic game plan.
David, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode 4, but once again, I've been visiting with David Greenberg, Special Advisor at LRN. I hope you'll join us tomorrow for our 5th and final episode, where we take a look at the veiled land of the future in the road ahead. David, thank you.
Sure, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of our special 5-part podcast series on What's the Tone at the Very Top, Boards and Compliance, with David Greenberg, Special Advisor at LRN. We're going to link to this report in the show notes, so check it out. It's chock-packed with lots of great information. I hope you will join us again for another episode of this special 5-part podcast series.